You go to a merchant you've never been at before, and you pay through the Square reader, and pling, you get an email confirmation from them without even having to ask. And you're like, wait, how did that just happen? Once you've seen that, you can't ever unsee that. And that becomes the new benchmark. Now anyone who's less than that is no longer great.
Being able to have this personalized approach to analytics is so important. So if you can understand the goal of your user, you can understand whether or not you're getting friction.
It was a moment of human empathy, human interaction, understanding. And when you looked at the data, the conversion rate online, you're 2 or 3%. In the contact center, it's like 30 or 40% or higher.
I'm just intrigued. I'm now curious what a purple pillow is. What makes it so great?
Man. It's the greatest thing that's ever happened. It is the greatest, I'm telling you. And by the way, I looked it up. It's the Purple Harmony pillow.
That's my baby, the Purple Harmony. You open the box and it literally says something along the lines of, congratulations, you just purchased the greatest pillow ever invented.
Today, we're sitting down with Joe Megibow, somebody who spent the last 25 years proving that digital friction isn't what most people think it is.
And if you think friction is just a slow page, Joe's going to help change your mind. He's going to break down why it's actually about expectations, psychology, and the moments customers don't even realize they're making decisions.
He talks about the early days as a founder of Tealeaf, if you remember that company, how identifying one friction point actually led to millions of dollars in recovered revenue, and why sometimes friction is the smartest thing you can do.
And he explains why the fastest page doesn't always win, why content can outperform speed, and how companies unknowingly sabotage high-value customers by optimizing only for the happy path.
And Joe doesn't just stop at UX. He gets into omnichannel misalignment, broken incentives, why contact centers aren't failures, and why humans are sometimes the most frictionless solution of all.
And I love the contact center part of this because he gets into understanding that driving that contact center conversation is what builds that loyalty. And if you've ever worked on speed budgets, checkout flows, cross-channel strategy, this episode is going to help you rewire how you think about the entire journey for customers, not just the digital space.
Let's get into it. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
Now, you've had a really interesting journey because you started as an engineer, then you went to business school, and then you kind of discovered data-driven marketing. Kind of walk us through a little bit of that, sort of dating back to your early .com days.
Thank you. I started as the classic high school nerd. I was definitely in the STEM side of things, went off to get an engineering degree. I did go to band camp. I was kind of thought that was going to be my career. I was on my way. It was something I really enjoyed. I was very quant. There's a creative side to engineering, but I thought that was going to be my journey. And as I got into industry, this was pre-web. It didn't quite prove to be as exciting as I hoped it would be, as I was watching all these business and marketing folks see career advancements that I was not seeing. So yeah, went back to business school, mostly because I just had never really thought about business. I had been so focused on engineering and the sciences, I just realized it was a gap of mine. So I discovered the quant side of marketing, which I didn't know was a thing. So even then, it wasn't web data, it was classic marketing data. So this was pricing studies and natural studies on price elasticity, or loyalty programs and buyer behavior and lifetime value analyses, and travel and grocery and things like that. So it was truly the underpinnings of a lot of the analysis side of marketing was already starting to have a renaissance. And then within a couple of years, the web happened, and timing couldn't have been better for a guy like me. So yeah, I went through a journey. I was part of the founding team of a data analytics company that ultimately became part of IBM, and really got into applied data. Specifically, this was a company back then called Tealeaf Technology, or Tealeaf. Yeah, it was one of the early analytic players on identifying friction as a predictive mechanism. The name Tealeaf, reading the tea leaves, was like, hey, if we could actually find on transactional websites what was sources of friction or how consumers behave. We could start to predict outcomes, and that was the thesis of it, and ultimately what we did. And through that, through one of our customers, Expedia, I found my way on the other side of the table in B2C businesses, and that's been my career. I've never looked back. I'm just this applied focus of customer-centric businesses trying to meet them on their terms.
And how do you think that discovering the marketing analytics aspect changed kind of your worldview?
My view of marketing before this, which was very naive, was sort of think of the show Mad Men. This was creative people who had their finger in the wind on behavior, or how you think of the fashion leader at a fashion company that understands taste and or is setting taste and setting style, which is very fickle. And there's obviously some skill there, but there's a bit of timing and art, and there are winners and losers. And the idea that you could start to unpack this in a data-driven way, especially on measurement, was really interesting to me, because this wasn't saying there wasn't a creative side to this and that brand doesn't matter, but it did say that consumers can measure outcomes, that you can measure performance, that you can measure both behavior and impact in economically quantifiable ways. So in the simple sense, that leveled the playing field. So now it wasn't I had to know better than you. It's I had to find a way to let my customers tell me, because I could measure it now, and they were going to vote every day with their decisions or vote with their wallets, and that's way smarter than my skill as an artist or my skill as a creative leader, because that's all that matters at the end of the day. And that became my true north.
And when you started, you were part of the founding team of Tealeaf, and this is back in the .com days. You were mentioning that you were actually using like weblogs back then, right?
I mean, most pages were static in the beginning. So a weblog was literally a record of every static page that a consumer saw. And these were the W3C logs and early analysis tools like Urchin, which became Google Analytics, and Web Trends and other systems that evolved from there, allowed you to start to make sense at the session level of where these customers went. But what they all missed the boat on, and what makes digital friction and digital analytics so hard, is the web didn't stay static. The web went very dynamic, where content on the page changed second by second, whether is it in stock or not, or the price you saw, or content information about your account, or news, or updates, or promotion. I mean, things were changing constantly on the same page. And I mean, you go all the way now and you have single page web apps. It's literally the entire website is one page. And GA4 had to kind of reinvent itself with mobile and apps and this single page metaphor. And none of that had been thought about in the early days of the web. So we were one of the early pioneers on trying to say, hey, the content is critical. What the consumer sees, what they do, which is fleeting and lives for a fraction of a moment only in their browser, and didn't exist a second before and won't exist a second after. If you don't have visibility into that full consumer experience and understand how they engage with, how do they react to it, how do you understand digital friction? How do you understand what really worked? Because the same page may be working fine for this customer, but not that customer. Why? And we were all flying blind. So, I mean, this was a very, very early effort to start to shine the light and actually understand consumer behavior.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing to think about, especially back then. I was actually early, I say early, but you're far before I started to use it. But I was an early Tea Leaf user back in 2016, 2015. So I was getting into it. I was starting to understand it. And it was one of my first introductions into a lot of this, like this experience-based monitoring, which is kind of how I detail it now, because it's what's most important about what you're talking about, the dependency of the content. But it's about what that dependency says, the race conditions that depend on it, and how those things convince a user that it's time to interact with the space that they're in. Because if that is happening in a fast way, we call it the Amazonian experience. If that happens immediately, it doesn't matter if it's a bloated page. It can have all the content in the world, but it's all about the perceived experience of the page and how much everything else happens around what that user is trying to actually achieve. If they can't achieve what they're trying to achieve because you're prioritizing the wrong content for that specific user, you have friction. If you have prioritized it and it works in a very fast, snappy way, even if a million other things continue to load and continue to do something, they don't really care. They're focused on their actual goal in front of them. So being able to properly have, and I'm almost talking like personalization of architecture, but I'm trying not to, but being able to have this like personalized like approach to analytics is so important. So if you can understand the goal of your user, you can understand whether or not they're hitting friction.
I think you're hitting on a really important part of thinking about friction of any kind or digital friction. And it's not a simple metric of page load time or content accuracy or content completeness or kind of quality. In the simplest sense, the only thing that matters is what the consumer's expectations were. And yeah, I mean, there's sort of the old joke of, I don't need to run faster than the cheetah. I only need to run faster than you. It's what are their expectations? And am I meeting or exceeding their expectations, which may be very different than how I measure things or may be different.
So, Joe, one of the things you guys were very early doing was identifying that friction had a massive economic impact. So you were tying friction and revenue together. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, my years at Tealeaf, we launched the company late 99 and I was there 7 years, I think. And we got really good at finding friction. There's so many form fields on so many pages and you get them wrong or you miss one or something. And usually there's a class style for an error message. An early example we had, there was a credit card field where you filled out your payment info and they were doing AVS, address verification, to establish is it right. So you put in your credit card, your billing address, submit. And this was a company that supported both consumers, but also had some business customers. It was a travel site. And they had an optional field, and it said optional, which was business name. But it was right above the billing address, and it was below the credit card, or it was in there somewhere. And one thing I've learned is if you put a field in front of customers, they're going to try to fill it out. And it said name, and they're putting in their credit card, and it's a business name, and consumers would think, well, I guess that means Bank of America or Chase or Citibank or the business of my credit card. And then it says address. So they'd look on the back of their credit card and they'd type in the address of the credit card, and then the transaction would fail. And, they're trying to figure out, it's like your address doesn't seem to be right or it didn't go through. And they're like, well, I mean, this is all correct. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here. All we needed to do is delete that field, just delete that company name field. And we saw $1 million of incremental revenue instantly. I mean, like step function, a month, $12 million of improved business by deleting a field off a form. And this was, 20 years ago. And, but it was, this early discovery that this friction matters and matters a lot and can have really high economic impact if you're getting it wrong, especially if you're a highly, if it's a transactional site and it's deep in the funnel and you're getting in the way. And, it was a little bit of, we were all figuring out as we went in the early days. But I mean, it was just the idea that something as simple as that can have that much economic impact was a wake-up call for many of us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's so simple yet so complex at the same time. And it kind of reminds me of an episode we had with David Cost previously, where he was talking about the checkout flow of Shopify and how the checkout flow of Shopify, their general mantra is consistency and simplicity, because it turns out you don't actually want to innovate in the checkout. So being able to give a customer, now of course this is for a smaller brand that is not necessarily going to create their own independent, say, I guess, logistics arm, but within the Shopify brand, it's being able to bring you a lot of that simplicity, a lot of that consistency that customers are really actually wanting. And in this case, the business name, you wanted to collect it, maybe for some reason, whatever reason it is, you wanted that field, but you take it away, you don't get that field anymore. Do you lose any value on that? maybe a small amount. I'm not sure what you're really trying to go after in this specific use case, but it's clearly worth it. $1 million a month. So
Yeah, but I think it's hitting back to, I'm a big fan of Shopify. We're currently on Shopify. I've had a number of companies I've worked at and led that have used it. So big fan of the platform, and we've done well with them. But I think this is more down to, you used the word consistency, back to my whole meeting consumer expectations. Well, consistency doesn't mean it's good. Consistency doesn't mean it can't be better. Consistency just means it is familiar such that I know what to do. And if it's familiar and just works against my expectations, that's where you don't have friction. But you have, the key, and where there's arbitrage opportunities are the surprise and delight moments that elevate. You gave a checkout example. Think about the first time you were at the POS, the cash and wrap, at a retailer that said, hey, we can email you your receipt. And, what you had to do? There was the little console with a stylus that you had to, on this tiny, tiny little keyboard on there, tap it in character at a time, that often was scratched and didn't work well, and you're poking on letters over and over again. Or the person behind the register had to have you read you the email out loud, which is this, crazy thing of spelling out letters, and, it's not always super straightforward, and they got to find a way to let you see it to confirm. And then like Square comes along, and you go to a merchant you've never been at before, and you pay through the Square reader, and pling, you get an email confirmation from them without even having to ask. And you're like, wait, how did that just happen? Once you've seen that, you can't ever unsee that. And that becomes the new benchmark. Now anyone who's less than that is no longer great. It's, maybe it works, but now I'm going to hold every other retailer who doesn't have that as not as good. And I think that there is always arbitrage opportunity. The trick is, it really does have to be something that meets a consumer need, or is better, or reduces a step. But that introduces challenges too. So with Shopify, for example, like a frustration I have is, in their interest in consistency and reducing steps, like they work really hard to say, do I know you? Have I ever seen you before at any other Shopify site? And lock you right into a state where they can get you through checkout. But I've worked for a number of companies that have rather expensive items to sell, and financing matters a lot. And when you have your buy now, pay later or financing options in Shopify, for example, once you get that deep in checkout, it's not a payment method, it's an alternate checkout flow. And like, you literally have to now log out of Shopify to see those options and get back in. So you've actually introduced a whole lot of friction for a subset of customers that may even not even realize they have options, in the interest of just going down the happy path, the most common path for Shopify. And that's always the tension, that's always the risk, is in trying to make it really efficient for the most common paths. How are you introducing substantially more friction for others? And I think that's where companies get themselves into trouble. It's you've got to really make sure you're balancing. I can't possibly know what everyone wants to do. And how am I making sure, for whatever those uses are, there is a path through? And I haven't just made it really easy for this set and now made it way harder for those. And it impacts sales. It absolutely is harming sales on Shopify for a set of customers.
So, Nick, I think my favorite retailer and I need therapy.
you and another website?
I've waited 5 seconds for it to load. 5. I could have gone and brewed coffee.
That's a quick coffee maker, first of all, but that sounds like a performance issue to me.
Yeah, instead of communicating, it just spun.
So you left, I'm sure. Classic abandonment issue due to latency.
Exactly. And that's why the Lowe's SRE team built site speed targets with Blue Triangle, so their users don't get ghosted by loading icons.
This is 5 steps to faster pages and fewer heartbreaks, all in the context of improved experience and improved revenue.
In fact, we turned it into a free playbook.
It's like a couples therapy for your digital experience. You know, for you and your website, Chuck.
So be sure to grab the 5-step site speed target playbook at bluetriangle.com/playbook.
Because love is patient, but users aren't.
So You come from an omni-channel background. In fact, Nick, he worked with Catherine at American Eagle. He was at American Eagle, so he knows Catherine, a prior guest. So what does friction look like when product, marketing, digital, and stores are all misaligned and the channels, you could end up with channel conflict?
When I joined American Eagle, ultimately we evolved my role into Chief Digital Officer, which was this shiny new title that was just starting to happen. But when I joined, I was leading Omnichannel, and that was a buzzword that was starting to make the rounds, and I couldn't find a clean definition of it. So, I mean, I'm like, well, it's in my title. I should probably figure out what I'm responsible for. So I thought a good place to start was, let me figure out what this omnichannel thing means. And, from a simple definition, it's all channels. I mean, that's the root of the word, but what does that mean in terms of why this is important in retail? And to me, it was back to the customer. It was really eliminating the friction across channels so that the consumer's needs are met regardless of their channel choices. That, in simple terms, was what I realized was my mission was on omnichannel. And that didn't happen anywhere. I mean, you would walk into, say you walked into an American Eagle store and there's denim there and there's a product I really, really like. It's the right wash, it's the right fit, but it just isn't in my size. And I pull up my phone and it's right there. And of course, it's in stock online. And the associate comes over and says, "Oh, what are you doing? Oh, don't do that. Come with me to the register. I can get that for you here." And you're like, "No, it's fine. I've got it." It's like, "Yeah, but if you do it there, you're going to have to pay shipping, and I can waive shipping at the register." So, okay, right off the bat, I've got two ways to buy where I've introduced different rules for my customer with different, friction points. Now, to that associate, if I'm standing in their store buying on the phone, that store gets no credit for that sale. I just borrowed their real estate and oxygen and tried on their product, and they get no credit for the sale. It's an online sale. If I go to the register, the store gets credit for that sale, even though it's shipped from the same warehouse on the same day to the same customer. They get credit for the sale. So P&L misalignment, behavioral misalignment, offer to the consumer misalignment. We've created all these channel dynamics around how we operate as a company that have nothing to do with the consumer. And then you take it a step further and you realize, hey, we've got separate people even determining how much of what to buy online and in the stores. But here's the consumer. It's the same customer. I mean, literally, here's that consumer looking at both sets of inventory simultaneously and choosing between them. So if it's the same customer, why do we have separate buyers running separate sales process and separate turns and separate views of velocity when you're literally dealing with the same customer as if they're two different people? I'll give you an example. We launched buy online, ship from store. Seemed like a really good idea. We were probably one of the first 10 major retailers to do this, but we've got all this inventory in stores and we got all these buyers online, and stores can only service the people who walk in the store. Why wouldn't I let my inventory in any one of my, at the time, 600-700 US American Eagle stores, why wouldn't I let them service anyone who wanted the inventory I had in my store? So if I had a way to ship out of a store, that opens up all sorts of opportunities. And what we discovered is it really, really was great for things like clearance. The things that, because normally it's the end of a season and it goes on sale and it starts heading to the back of the store and then on the clearance racks. And, hopefully you can sell it at 10 off, 20 off, 50 off, 70 off. And then it just gets liquidated. You sell it off to a third party. But it's limited to the inventory I have there. If I could open that up where, hey, I've got this top in Cincinnati and a buyer in Portland, and we happen to have this no longer in season item in the right size there, match them up and I could sell it to them at 20 off. But you look at how we're organized as a company. Okay, what's actually happening? The online business had to put all of these shipping stations in all these stores. So we have an enormous amount of fixed cost overhead we just had to introduce in our business. The shipping rates shipping out of a store are nowhere near as good as the shipping rates out of our distribution center. So our cost to fulfill just went up per one of those orders. it caused more split ships. So more often you ended up with a case where you've got 2 boxes coming to the home instead of 1 box, which again added shipping rates. And oh, by the way, what we're selling way more of is discounted product, clearance product. So our average margins online are actually getting squeezed because we just found a whole bunch of really good margin. So from a DTC point of view, if you were just managing at the channel level, you'd be like, your costs are going up, your gross margins are shrinking, your variable costs of fulfillment are skyrocketing. This is a disaster. You're killing the business. But when you looked at it at the company level, it was, holy cow, we actually had the lowest markdown we'd ever had in the history of the company because we could actually get all this inventory efficiently into consumers' hands without having to go into deep clearance or liquidation.
So, Joe, the last 5 years of your career, so you've spent in the DTC world, and as you put it, low frequency, high risk purchases like mattresses and CPAP machines and liquor or alcohol. Talk a little bit about what you learned in that and where does delight matter most in that?
I mean, these were some tough categories, and my last 4 companies were all turnarounds as well, which you talk about needing to remove friction when you're not making money. Finding ways to improve the business matter a lot. And you can even get deceived on things that appear to have, like finding low friction transactions that aren't actually profitable doesn't help you either. And there's a lot of temptation to find paths of easy customers, easy business, but still are actually doing harm to the business. I mean, it's been an interesting journey. In mattress, if I'm selling apparel and it costs me a certain amount to acquire the customer and I want to get them to buy that first item and have a great first experience, the likelihood is I'm going to get a second or third transaction. And you're really looking at it as, hey, I'm willing to acquire them, maybe break even, because I know I'm going to, on average, get a second or third transaction. And some of them will buy from me 3 or 4 times a year. So I'm acquiring a stream of revenues. In something like a mattress, you can't build the business with that idea. If you can't acquire someone and sell them a mattress and make money on that as a one and done, as a single transaction, you don't have a healthy business. As it turns out, people do buy sheets and pillows, and it turns out most adults that we would be targeting here have multiple mattresses in their homes, or sometimes even multiple homes. There's all these occasions that come up, but you still have to be transactionally profitable. And on considered purchase, it means also friction doesn't mean that I got to acquire them to the site and convert them in that first session or I'm done. These are considered purchases, which may mean introducing friction to the cycle that is actually reducing friction on the entire purchase journey. Like, the best thing I could do right now is encourage them not to buy and go to one of our stores and check it out for themselves. Because if I can get them to do that, I'm definitely going to get the sale. And, again, if I'm just looking at it as stepwise conversion in the site and what's everything that causes them to break out, that's a failure. It's like, wow, that's killing my conversion. So again, you got to step back and look at the overall consumer journey and figure out, hey, if this is a considered purchase and they're going to be noodling on this for 14 or 15 or 18 days, how do I help them through the journey as simply and easily as possible? So whatever it is they're looking for, whenever they're looking for that, whether it's content, information, validation, concern about returns, concern about warranty, feel, comfort, whatever it is, that they're able to get to that at that moment to culminate in the successful sale at the end of it. And by the way, digital friction goes beyond the sale. Most mattresses, like a new pair of shoes, has a break-in period. So managing expectations on what they're going to experience as they start their journey with the product has financial impact on return rate, which on something like mattress is kind of expensive. So it's not even just getting to the close. It's really, how are you managing that customer through the journey? And it's just point of looking for these, where we are getting in the way and giving the customer what they need on their terms.
So I have always slept poorly at hotels. My back's going to hurt, my neck's going to hurt, everything's going to be miserable. I went to London recently and I was flying in an overnight flight. I decided to fly with my pillow for the first time ever. And I was using it on the flight. It was fine on the flight. But this time I got to use this pillow at every single hotel that I stayed in London, which was 3 different hotels. So this is a sample of 3, guys. I have never actually slept well at a hotel until I traveled with my pillow. This was a purple pillow. The thing has changed my life. The purple pillow has changed my life. So thank you.
Sleep is really important. You gotta solve that one. I have also spent much of the last 6 years just laser focused on sleep health. Sleep's really important. But how do you sell that story? How do you get someone, with Chuck's example of I didn't understand what that shop pay thing was until I did. It's how you help people through that journey. And there are some leaps here. And in the case of, I brought up footwear, I brought up mattress, selling something that is very much around feel online it's a very unnatural thing. I mean, we in our digital display, because this is another source of friction, is overcoming that. We were very inspired by all of the like the food ads, where you would see these ads for like burger joints on TV, and the sizzling meat and the steam coming off the burger, and the crisp lettuce with a water bead on it, and all this stuff. It's very visual, but it conjures up, it emotes this sense of taste and smell. And I mean, you salivate looking at it because your memory kicks in, and all these things that aren't in the visual are actually happening. And, for us, it was, can we do that we had to see how it feels? How do we get them to express things digitally, interactively in advertisements, to emote that sense of comfort and feel? And it's very difficult, and you have to be very deliberate about it. But those are friction points. There's a lot of just BS factor out there. There's so much noise out there. I mean, you walk around New York and everything is the best coffee in New York. I mean, you walk around the web and every mattress is the best mattress ever invented, the best night's sleep. And this is in a lot of these internet categories. And there's economic incentives. Affiliates get paid, and pay-to-play roundups, and pay-to-play rankings. And there's a lot of money in this stuff. But what's been lost is what we were supposed to have in the web is independent transparency and empowering the consumer. It sort of got messed up, and it creates a lot of fear with consumers. It creates a lot of confusion. That's friction. And that's not UX or page design. This is friction they're coming in with. And how am I addressing those friction points? Because if I can't, I'm not going to get the sale.
I'm just intrigued. I'm now curious what a purple pillow is and what makes it so great.
Man. It's the greatest thing that's ever happened. It is the greatest. I'm telling you. And by the way, I looked it up. It's the Purple Harmony pillow.
That's my baby. The Purple Harmony. We sorry on the marketing side, but we wanted to be deliberately provocative on it, and we called it the greatest pillow ever invented. And when you open the box, it actually, back to reinforcing, you open the box and it literally says something along the lines of, "Congratulations, you just purchased the greatest pillow ever invented."
It's literally in the product description that I'm looking at right here. The greatest pillow ever invented.
Yeah, that's
hex
me.
grid,
I'm very sorry
no
about
pressure
that.
support.
That is entirely my fault. So in fact, my team fought me on that. They were like, "You're kidding, right?" I'm like, "No, we're putting that on the page." But it's one, we really believed it. And two, we wanted to bring the consumers along. And it's getting back to some of these points on, if everybody is saying they've got the best cup of coffee in New York, you got to come up with a different way to say it if you think you actually do have coffee that's different. And this was an example of, I just needed to get the consumer's attention. It almost didn't matter if they said, let's say that sounds interesting, or you're completely full of it. That can't be true. Either way, you get a reaction, you get an emotion. And as long as they're like, let me see, now I have a chance to actually prove the differentiation and win them over. And again, this is more on the marketing friction side of things, but we had invented something really novel, and it was truly an invention. I mean, in the most complete of ways. We had someone on the manufacturing floor who had a crazy idea on an existing product on, like, what if we set it up differently and ran through some of the steps out of order, and we're shooting things, we were injection molding and doing it through materials, and like, would that even work? And it was like, let's give it a try, and invented some techniques that became part of this pillow just through curious serendipity. And I mean, it was a truly an example of innovation top to bottom. But then how do you sell that when everybody has the best cup of coffee in New York? And we had to find some ways to break through and explain the difference.
So, Joe, it's been a great conversation. There's so much we didn't even get a chance to talk about, but what's one widely held belief about frictionless digital experiences that you think people get wrong, that you fundamentally disagree with?
I think most people believe the contact center is a cost center that only exists because of failure of digital friction. If I was getting it right, I wouldn't even need a contact center. And I think that is catastrophically wrong. In fact, I think that is a deliberate introduction of friction for many customers at many moments in their consumer journey. I learned in multi-channel retail and a variety of these companies that humans like humans for the right reasons when they're helpful and they meet their needs. And we have a lot of sources of friction that humans are the best solution to that friction. This goes all the way back 20 years ago when I was at Expedia. Coming out of Tealeaf, I'm this digital native. I'm like, it's all about reducing friction and let me at 'em. And I got into Expedia and I discovered, and at that time, the .com part of any brand name mattered a lot. So this was Expedia.com. And I'm like, it's an online company. I got in and I discovered that like 30% of our sales were happening through the contact center. And I viewed that as a bug, not a feature. Like, what are we doing so badly? Or how are we misrepresenting? Just go to the website. What's going on here? And some of it was friction. Some of it was they were calling because they couldn't do things on the website. But what a lot of it was this really simple human interaction. And you get back to what you're selling. Hotel rooms was, our bread and butter on the profit side. We had a bigger collection of hotel rooms all over the world, and we really catered well to people who were taking their family vacation. And, you book a hotel room for your family for a week somewhere, and it's a misfire. Not only is your vacation ruined, your family may never forgive you. It's a really, really expensive, important decision. And the way these phone calls went, because I stepped back, just like you look at the data online, I started listening to the calls. And it was this really simple interaction. It was literally just, Chuck, this hotel is great. You're going to love it. This is going to be great. I've heard what you're looking for. This hotel is that. It's going to be great. And the customer, you could hear them take a breath and be like, thank you. Here's my credit card. Cha-ching, you got the sale done. It was a moment of human empathy, human interaction, understanding. And when you looked at the data, the conversion rate through the contact center, online you're 2 or 3%. In the contact center, it's like 30 or 40% or higher. And, you look at the average order value and it's, 1.5 times the size of what's on the website. And you look at the nature of the purchases and they tend to be bigger, more complex things. But I realized there's a thing there. So like when I got to American Eagle Outfitters, we didn't really sell anything over the phones. It was purely, where's my order? Where's the status? How do I do a return? That kind of stuff. And when I brought it up, I was almost laughed out of the room. Like, contact center people can't sell jeans. And I'm like, somehow we've staffed 35,000 people or so across all our stores, all of whom were young kids, and we trained them really well, and they do a really good job. We really couldn't train 50 people in a contact center to be as good as the best of those. So we tried it. And, by the time I left, we were doing $100 million of sales through the contact center with really great agents who are as smart and knowledgeable about the product as anyone in any store.
Well, Joe, what's the best way for listeners to get in touch with you?
I am LinkedIn, probably. I'm there. I'm active. You can find me there. There aren't a lot of Joe Megibows on LinkedIn.
That's true. Well, that's awesome. Well, we appreciate you being on the show. Definitely reach out to Joe. We'll put a link in the show notes, and you can always reach and get in touch with me and Nick. I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm at Chuck Moxley, and Nick is
in Paladino.